Welcome back to Listening to Reading. We are continuing our quest through the Boxcar Children, the Yellow House Mystery. We are on chapter number 7 today. It's called Company in the Woods. Company in the Woods. Henry paddled almost as fast as Joe for about 2 hours. Then Joe could see that Henry was behind him. A little tired, Henry? Joe shouted, slowing down and waiting for Henry. A little bit. How far is it? Not very far now. Look over there. He pointed at a spot down the lake. 3 trees. There's where our camp's going to be. Henry saw the spot at once. I can paddle that far, he called back. So they started out once more. It will take some time to get the camp ready for the night, Joe told Jesse. I want to get there long before dark. We have to get supper too, said Benny. Don't forget the company, said Joe, winking at Jesse. Everybody was now looking at the 3 trees. As they came nearer, they could see a beach where canoes could land. Near the beach, there was an open place. Soon, with a strong push of his paddle, Joe sent his canoe up on the beach. Henry's canoe came alongside it, and Joe and Henry jumped out. They helped everyone out. Then they pulled the 2 canoes up on the beach, almost out of the water, and tied them to a tree. That's so they won't float away, said Benny. Take everything out, cried Joe. Put it in this open place. Here's one of the best camping places in all of Maine. A long wooden table all made, cried Henry, and places to sit. That's great. What a nice smell, said Violet to Alice. I just love the smell of evergreen trees. It makes me think of the dear old boxcar days. I don't see any company, though, said Benny, looking around. Well, you will, said Joe. He seemed to be very sure. The first thing will be a campfire because we are so hungry. The next thing will be the tents because we will be sleepy. He took out an axe. Here is a path. We'll follow it and cut down 2 small trees. Not evergreens, though. These trees must be just right. Look at this picture. See, the top must have a fork, but the fork must be one-sided so we can drive the tree into the ground. All 4 children looked at the picture and started to walk down the path. Wait a minute, said Joe. There's something else we must find. Do you see the pail hanging over the fire on a long branch? We must have a long branch like that with a fork at the top and another to hang our water pail on. But trees don't grow like that, said Jesse. All branches grow one way, don't they, Joe? You just look around, said Joe, smiling, and you might find one. First, the children began to look for a tree that was not an evergreen. It was Violet who saw the first one. Joe said the fork was just right, and Henry began to cut it down. Jesse and Benny soon found another just like it. Joe, wait! I hear something, called Jesse. They all stood still and listened. Far in the woods, they heard someone whistling. Joe laughed. Company, he said. The whistling came near. Hi, shouted Joe. Hi, answered a deep voice. Just then, the children saw a white-haired man in a brown coat carrying a very large pack. His face was brown from the sun. His blue eyes were kind. This is Mr. Hill, children, said Joe, smiling at the stranger. Mr. Long tells me he is one of the best guides in Maine. Well, I wouldn't say that, laughed the man. I suppose you are Joe Alden. Want me to build your shelter house and cook you some cornbread? Cornbread, cried Alice. I just love cornbread. Me too, shouted Benny. But what about a shelter house? You would ask that, Benny, said Henry. But we don't know either. No, cried Benny. Don't tell us. After all, Mr. Hill, we'll watch you build it, and then we'll know what it is. Not a bad idea, said Henry. Don't forget, we still have to find that branch with 2 forks in it. Mr. Hill could see 2 or 3 branches like that, but he said nothing. He just smiled and let the children find a tree for themselves. Very well, said Henry at last, looking up at a tree. There is a branch growing both ways. I never knew they grew like that. Cut it just below the fork, Henry, said Joe. Soon the branch was cut. Joe and Henry cut branches of evergreens and carried them back to camp for beds. Then Mr. Hill and Joe put everyone to work. We must get everything done before the sun sets, said Mr. Hill. It gets very cold up here at night. You'll be glad of your warm blanket rolls. Benny, is that your name? You come and hold these 2 trees for me. In no time at all, 2 little forked trees were standing in the ground with a long pole between them. The branch was soon hooked over the pole. Mr. Hill put the water pail on the hook. You can push this branch to one side, you see. Sometimes I get 2 or 3 to cook with. I can see how that works, said Benny. The water gets hot when you cook supper. Is the hot water to wash dishes in? Asked Violet. That's right, and for everything else you want to wash. Maybe hands, said Henry, laughing and looking at his hands. It's good clean dirt, though, said Benny, looking at his own hands. Smells good, just like evergreens. Then he forgot all about his hands, for Mr. Hill began to make the shelter half to keep the wind from the fire. This would keep rain out, too, if we had any rain, he said to Benny. And this is the baker, where we cook the cornbread. Here's a couple of wonderful pictures here. You can see their new friend, and you can see all the different things that they're building and putting together. Yeah, these are some great illustrations. Oh, that's a funny dish, said Benny. How does it work? Mr. Hill laughed. You set it up with this open side toward the fire. The inside gets very hot and cooks the cornbread, a fine, even brown on top. Then after supper, we can set it up on this other end and wash dishes in it. Well, isn't that clever, cried Henry. Benny won't mind washing dishes in that. Now somebody had better go and find some wood, said Mr. Hill. We've got to get a fire going right away. Benny jumped up and worked very hard getting wood for the fire, for he was getting hungry. Meanwhile, Joe and Henry put up the 2 small tents. Alice and Jessie laid the evergreen branches in the tents for beds. Where will Mr. Hill sleep? Asked Jessie. Oh, he has his own tent, Joe answered. It will take him about a minute to put his tent up and make his bed and go sound asleep. I hope he won't go to sleep before he makes that cornbread, said Alice. We're going to have ham and eggs, too, said Mr. Hill. But we haven't any eggs. No, but I have, said Mr. Hill with a laugh. I brought along a few things, just for your first day. Then tomorrow morning, I have to leave you. How delicious the ham did smell when Mr. Hill put it in the big pan and it began to get brown. Then he dropped in 12 eggs. Joe said he could at least eat 2, while Henry said he could eat 3. Real butter, cried Jessie, and as Mr. Hill took it out. Do you remember the first time we had real butter in the boxcar? Cornbread isn't much good without butter, said Mr. Hill. Violet began to set up the table with 10 plates. Soon they were all eating their first meal in camp. At last Joe said, the cornbread is gone and the ham is gone. Can anyone stay awake long enough to wash the dishes? I can if you use that funny dish, said Benny. He watched Mr. Hill put the hot water from the pail into the baker. But I am so sleepy, I could go to sleep standing up. Soon the dishes were washed and put away. Alice, Violet, and Jessie had one tent, and Henry, Joe, and Benny had the other. They spread their blanket rolls on the beds of evergreen boughs. Before long, the moon looked down on a sleepy camp, but softly through the woods walked a large black animal. He smelled people. He smelled food, too. Soon he walked very quietly. There was the sight of bacon hanging in a tree up high. That was easy. He could stand up. Maybe he could pull it down. He loved bacon. Up went one front paw, and the bacon began to swing back and forth. The animal was not the only one awake. Mr. Hill had heard the visitor. This was the very minute he had been waiting for. Joe, he called from his own tent. We have a visitor. Joe woke up suddenly. I'll tell the children, he answered. Henry, wake up. Then Henry was awake. Jessie, he whispered. Then everyone was awake. Oh, dear, said Violet, sitting up. What is it? And that's the end of chapter number 7. Now, I'm sure you can probably guess who that visitor might be. But chapter 8 is called The Lumber Camp, so that doesn't give you any kind of a hint. But the picture I'm looking at on chapter 8, certainly will. I hope you've enjoyed Chapter 7 and looking forward to seeing you next time. Hope you've enjoyed the Yellow House Mystery Chapter number 7.